Hey guys, it's Kaylee, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here for my weekly reading update, so I'm going to chat you through the books that I have finished this week and what I am currently reading. I've not read quite as much as I have in previous weeks, but I've still managed to finish 3 books and I'm in the middle of one. So I'm just going to jump straight into the books. So the first one that I have finished I mentioned in my last video, and that is Michelle Obama's memoir Becoming. So in this memoir, Michelle covers a variety of different topics. So she starts out with her childhood and when she is growing up in the south side of Chicago with her brother and her parents. She moves on to her schooling and where she ends up going to university and really just trying to find her professional path and what she wants to do for her career. And then it moves obviously into her meeting Barack, building a relationship there, starting a family and moving into the world of politics. So for me, I really enjoyed the first sort of third of this book. That was the section that resonated the most with me, and I think it's really because this is essentially a coming of age story and I absolutely love that sort of thing. She talks about what it was like growing up in the neighbourhood that she lived in with her brother, and the white flight that happened in that neighbourhood during that time. So the white families were slowly moving out of that neighbourhood into the suburbs. She talks about how that felt as a black or minority ethnic family to be left. You know, her friends were just moving away, moving to other schools and moving to a different neighbourhood, and she talks about how that felt. I really loved seeing all of her relationships with her family and friends portrayed in the book and how she describes her own characteristics and traits as well. And she's really honest, she's very raw in the book, and she talks about the good as well as the bad, and she's quite self-aware as well about her own personality traits. She then moves on to talk about obviously her schooling, so where she ended up going to school and what she wants to do with her life. There was a moment in the book where at the end of high school she sits down with her guidance counsellor and she says that she wants to follow her brother and go to Princeton, and the guidance counsellor says that she doesn't think she's Princeton material. And I think that just really hit me because, you know, she talks about how she had those low expectations on her. Apart from her family, pretty much everybody else didn't really expect much from her, even though she was, you know, achieving really high grades at school. I think just because of her background and where she came from, people didn't expect her to go on and achieve great things. So I think that those people's attitudes, and especially this guidance counsellor saying that, just fueled a fire in her to be like, well, do you know what, I'm going to show them. And she does end up going to Princeton and she becomes a very successful lawyer with a pretty high salary. So it's at this law firm where she first meets Barack, and they do work together for a while, and I really loved seeing the development of their relationship. I think it's really interesting because obviously you see so much of Michelle and Barack Obama on the TV in news stories, and that's really what I've been exposed to, and so it was really interesting to see them portrayed as sort of young 20-somethings, professional people, just living life and being normal. And she talks about even that Barack had a pretty rubbish car that had a hole in the floor that you could literally see the road as he was driving. And I just think it was really heartwarming and very, again, just really honest and raw how she was talking about the building of their relationship. I really loved as well the way that she talks about being a working mum, and she doesn't shy away from the difficulties that they had and the challenges that they had to face. But her and Barack worked extremely long hours and they were bringing up 2 young children at the time. And I just think it was really empowering to hear her talk about that. Again, there was a moment that I loved where she brought her baby to a job interview, and she says herself, you know, she was like, I could have asked my mum to look after her, but I wanted to bring the baby and basically plant her on the table and say, you know, this is me, I come with a baby, that's what you're gonna get if you hire me. And I just really loved that. Michelle also talks at length about how she felt, despite the fact that she was successful in her career and she was making a lot of money, she didn't feel fulfilled in her career, and she kind of starts to look elsewhere to see what else she can do to make her happy. And there's a conversation that she has with her mum where she says to her, you know, I'm not fulfilled. And I think her mum is a bit like, well, I think her mum says, make the money and worry about happiness later. But Michelle doesn't want to do that. You know, she kind of has. She's had that high profile job and she's not happy. She wants to do something else. So this was really, really powerful when she sort of takes the plunge and decides, well, do you know what? That isn't the be all and end all. I'm actually going to go out and look for something that will make me happy. And yeah, okay, it might half my salary, but I'll have a better quality of life because of my happiness. And so I found that really powerful, because I think a lot of people probably are in that situation where, you know, we're constantly striving for success, but what does success actually mean? Surely we should be striving for happiness instead. And I thought that that was really a really important message that I took away from the book. So further on into the book, once Michelle and Barack are starting their family, they do talk a lot about politics, because obviously Barack has started to run for various Senate positions and eventually he decides to run for president. So there is a lot of talk of politics in the book, and I think at this point, so maybe about 2/3 of the way through, the pacing was a little bit slower, and I think for me I was slightly less engaged, only because I don't have as much of an interest or knowledge in the politics side of it, and there was a lot of unfamiliar names thrown around as well. Still really fascinating and really enjoyable, but just slightly slower paced. And again, Michelle is really honest about how she felt during this time. You know, she was very hesitant to encourage Barack to go for these positions because she knew the toll it was going to take on the family. And I loved that she includes that in the book, because it makes you see that it wasn't all plain sailing for them, that there were challenges. And yeah, okay, she needed to decide, am I going to support Barack in this as a family? Are we going to support him? But what is that going to mean for the family? Eventually, once the family make it to the White House, it was really, really interesting to see the sneak peek that we get around the house, how it runs, what life is like for the president and his family. That was really, really fascinating, and I really loved hearing from Michelle what she decides to do with her influence and her power while she's there. And I think, you know, she says being the First Lady was such an interesting thing, because it wasn't a job, it wasn't a specific title that, you know, she got a salary for, but she really wanted to make it meaningful. And so they spent 8 years there, and, you know, I think what the stamp that they put on the place will probably remain for a very, very long time. Simple things like they decided to put, I think, some of the artwork in the White House. The first black female artist was displayed in one of the rooms, and the wait staff usually wore tuxes all the time, 24/7, and they said, right, no, actually have more of a casual dress. I think they wore like khakis and polo shirts, because they didn't want it to be like that. You know, they wanted it to be home as well, even though it was their workplace and it's the White House. They wanted it to feel like home, especially for their children. I know Michelle had mentioned in the book, and also in an interview that I watched, that she told the housekeeping staff, or she asked them to not make her 2 daughters beds in the morning, because she was like, I need to raise kids who know how to make their own bed, which I just thought was amazing. Like, I think she always had an eye on what reality was, and that obviously this was going to come to an end, but also that her girls were growing up to become adults in the world, and she wanted to make sure that they understood the world that they were living in and how to be happy and successful people. Overall, I really, really enjoyed this read. I thought it was a pretty epic, moving look at Michelle's life, and I found it really inspiring and empowering and motivational as well. I thought she had a lot to say about a lot of different topics, and it's made me much more interested in her programmes. I definitely have a newfound respect for Michelle Obama, so I would highly recommend that you pick this one up. So the next book that I finished this week was Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. So I am rereading this series in preparation for The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which came out a couple of days ago. So this was, when I read it the first time, one of my favourite books. I gave it 5 stars the first time round, and to be honest, I'd kind of forgotten a lot of what happens in this book. But I have to say, after my reread, this is still one of my favourite young adult books, and I think I actually enjoy it better than The Hunger Games, the first book in the series. Controversial, but I think this is my favourite. So, obviously, if I'm talking about this book, there's going to be spoilers for the first book in the series. So if you've somehow not read The Hunger Games, FYI, there's going to be spoilers here. This book obviously begins after the events of the first book, and we can see Katniss and Peeta living back in District 12 after their win in the Victor's village, and what life is like for them. The interactions between Katniss and Peeta are a little bit awkward, and I think, you know, Katniss is really trying to understand her own feelings and whether the care that she feels for Peeta is genuine or if it's just a habit from how she was acting when she was in the arena. With Gale, we don't really see a lot of him in this book. He kind of is there at the beginning and he's there right at the end, but he's not in the book pretty much at all. And I thought it was really clever the way that Suzanne Collins builds on him and Katniss's relationship even though he's not present. Because we're in Katniss's head the whole time and you can see her emotions and how she's really trying to think through everything. And I just absolutely loved the way that their relationship developed because they have such a strong friendship, and that's really apparent in this book, and I just loved seeing Katniss go through those feelings. I think what's most apparent for me in this book and why I really loved it is because of the growth in Katniss's character. And we see her obviously toying with her feelings towards these 2 boys, but with everything she's really just thinking through everything that happens. And obviously with the whole idea of revolution, she just in the moment thought at the end of the Hunger Games, okay, I'm going to use these berries to save us both. But everybody else either is thinking, oh, you were so in love with Peeta, or you wanted to start a revolution and you defied the capital. And she's like, well, what did I think? Like, she's not even sure herself why she did that. And so she's really trying to piece together in her mind how she actually feels. And I thought that that was done really, really well in this book. Going back to Peeta, like, he's never going to be my favourite character. I don't love Peeta that much, to be honest. I think in the first book especially, and then even moments in this book, to me he seems a little bit one-dimensional, only because every single interaction that we see Peeta have, he mentions at some point about how in love with Katniss he is. And I get it, but then at the same time I'm like, come on, like, do you have any other personality traits at all? One moment I really, really loved with Peeta though is when him, Katniss and Haymitch are in that sort of attic room, and Peeta realises that Katniss and Haymitch have kept another secret from him. You know, they've been in on something and they've not told him, and he goes absolutely mental and he like smashes a lamp across the room, and I just thought that was brilliant. And finally I was like, Peeta's actually showing some personality and showing some character, which I really, really loved. So it definitely gets fixed sort of halfway through this book and towards the end, and I did find myself liking Peeta a lot more in this book. I also really loved all of the new characters that we get introduced to in this. So obviously with the Quarter Quell, we get a lot of new tributes from other districts that we get to meet. And I really loved this. Like, I really love the diversity of characters that Suzanne Collins portrays, both in race, in gender and in age as well. It was really interesting to see that, because I think in a lot of young adult books, it's almost like people over the age of 25 don't exist. So it was really nice to see some older characters in this book and how the dynamics between the characters worked with that thrown in. I think this also made us more interested in the history of Panem, because we're seeing a wider range of districts. It really just sparks a curiosity in us to really understand more about the history of Panem and how it came about, which obviously we'll explore that more in Mockingjay. But then again, now that I know that there's a prequel, that just really is exciting for me to know that we're going to get a little bit of backstory. And I think she does really well the idea of revolution, because it's kind of this undercurrent throughout this whole book, and there's moments that we see through Katniss's eyes that's happening out with her own sphere, but it's not like the centre of the plot. And obviously that's what we come to in Mockingjay in the conclusion of the trilogy. But I thought it was done really well, that it was just this undercurrent, and it kind of built that suspense. And obviously we're in Katniss's mind, so she is kind of in the dark a lot of the time, and she doesn't really understand what's going on, and she gets hints from people, things that people have said or that she sees on the news, but she doesn't really understand. I really enjoyed that in the book, because I thought that is how a revolution would happen, you know. They would try and hush it up as long as possible before everybody knew it was happening, and almost be in a state of denial, the people of the capital, that this was happening. So I thought that was done really, really well, and it builds this suspense throughout so that we are super ready to jump into Mockingjay once this book is over. And then finally, I have to mention the Quarter Quell Games, because I just thought that this was unbelievable. Like, I can't believe that this came out of someone's brain. The imagination used here to create this arena was just amazing, and I thought it was just fascinating, and every aspect that was introduced in the book caught me by surprise, even though I'd read it before. Every aspect was just so fascinating and surprising and shocking, and it just kept you guessing on every single page. I was about halfway through this book when I was like, so much has happened already, and there's still half the book to go. This is just such an epic, and I think when I was reading it, I was like, I can't actually remember how they managed to fit all of this into one movie, but they did. This was just such an action-packed, enjoyable, fun reading experience, and it just had the perfect balance of action along with the character growth, the character development, new characters thrown in, and bubbling of the revolution for the next book to come. So I just thought it was fantastic. This is definitely one of those rare sequels that really stands out. It doesn't suffer from second book syndrome, and like I say, I think I enjoyed it better than the first one, so definitely recommend this. Absolutely loved it, and still a favourite. So then the last book that I finished this week was an ebook that I received from NetGalley for review, and that is Writers and Lovers by Lily King. So this book, although it's out already in the US, is released in the UK on the 28th of May. So this is a contemporary literary fiction novel, and it is set in 1997 in the Boston-Cambridge area of Massachusetts. And we follow a woman named Casey Peabody, who is an aspiring writer who is reeling from the emotions of a recent love affair, and she is grieving the passing of her mother. The novel is about so many different things and so many aspects of Casey's life, but ultimately it is like a snapshot of this moment in her existence. So when we first meet Casey at the beginning of the book, she's talking about the death of her mother, who passed away really suddenly on a trip in Chile. And this death really brings up a lot of emotions for Casey, and she feels a lot of different things. And Lily King does such a good job of not telling us everything straight away, and we kind of have to piece together what happens, but we do get thoughts from Casey's mind where she's talking about what happened in her past, and talking about the last time that she saw her mother or spoke to her mother, and bringing up a lot of things from her childhood as well. And so we soon learn that Casey felt a lot of abandonment as a child, and now that this death has happened, those feelings are kind of coming back to her. Casey also is talking about a recent love affair that she had when she was at a writing camp, so we don't see this relationship happen on the page, but she is thinking back to the relationship and how it made her feel. And while she's talking about this relationship and trying to get over it, she's also building a relationship with two other men in the book. I think Lily King does such a good job here of not making this like your typical love triangle. She really depicts these relationships in such a normal way, in a way that, you know, is really relatable, and this is how you would date in the real world. And the decisions that Casey makes and the emotions that she feels and the reactions that she has are just really normal and really relatable. And I think as a reader, you really understand why she is doing the things that she's doing and saying the things that she's saying. I think she is a very relatable character. These two men that she sees really represent different things that Casey wants and needs. And through getting to know them, she's really getting to understand herself and her own needs and her own desires. So this is a book set in the book world, and it is about writing largely, and I think that is a trope that puts a lot of people off, and it can be done very badly, but Lily King does it here absolutely beautifully. She talks about books and writing in such an engaging way, and you can see that both Lily King as the author, but Casey herself as the protagonist is really, really passionate about writing. So Casey has been writing a novel for the past 6 years. And this is where we see her in the book, in the middle of writing her novel. So we get scenes where she is writing. We don't get excerpts from Casey's book. And it's done in a way that celebrates the act of writing and the joy in not everyone enjoying the same piece of writing, the same piece of work, and that everyone will get something different out of a text. In amongst all of that as well is the discussion of Casey's mental health. So it's never overtly mentioned, but Casey does talk about certain things that she feels and how she reacts to different situations, and it becomes quite clear to us as the reader that she does suffer from some sort of anxiety disorder. Casey finds ways herself to cope with this without seeking professional help, but she also has the support from her group of really emotionally intelligent and inspiring friends who are always there to support her and who I absolutely loved. Each one of the friends felt so realistic and believable and fully formed that genuinely each one of her friends could have had a novel written about them and I would have read it. Lastly, Lily King's ability to write a scene was just really, really great. I think as I was reading the book, and even now, I can really visualise each of the scenes and the setting in my mind really, really vividly. It was just very cinematic and it kind of played out like a movie in my mind. And that just made it even more enjoyable, and I think will make it a very memorable read as well. If you can't tell, I absolutely loved this book. I think if you really enjoyed Sally Rooney, so if you're a fan of normal people, or even Ali Smith, I think then that you would enjoy this book. It really, really surprised me and kind of caught me off guard, but when I finished it, I just thought that was one of the best books I've read in a long time, and it flew to the top of my favourites list. So then lastly, the book that I am currently about halfway through is A Place for Us by Fatima Farheen Mirza. So this book, I'm about halfway through, just less than halfway, and I am really enjoying this book so far, so I'll talk about it more once I've finished it, of course, but it has been a little bit slower going than I was expecting. This is kind of like a family drama, and it talks about, we're following an Indian Muslim family living in America. And so it talks a lot about sibling dynamics and sibling relationships, but I'm also really enjoying the talk of the Muslim faith and the children of the family really trying to come to terms with their faith and where they come from, because they've lived in America all of their life, and obviously they are faced with quite a lot of racism and people saying, you know, go back to your own country. And I just read a section where it talks about 9/11 and the hate that the kids get in school is just crazy. And you know, the two girls in the family, they go to school, you know, a couple of days later, and their dad tells them, you can't wear your hijab in school now because, you know, we just don't know how people are going to react. And it's just fascinating to me. So I'm really, really enjoying what the book is saying and the discussions that it's having, but it is just a little bit slower going. So hopefully I will finish this soon, but I might pick up another book in the meantime. So that is everything for this week. Hopefully I will get a lot of reading done this weekend because I have quite a large stack of books that I was hoping to get to in May. Please let me know what you guys have been reading this week, and if you have any new favourites like me. I've had a really successful reading week with a couple of 5-star books. So let me know if you have any favourites you'd like to recommend. And thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.